conversations and should be cultivating curiosity as an essential state of mind for learning. It's a university. This is our mission. And so I invited the campus community to join me in a campus read of Monica's book. My hope is that this will give us the tools and courage to start having those bridge building conversations so that we might ourselves build a more collaborative, inclusive, and resilient community. Before I turn it over to Melvin to introduce our speaker, I want to share a story that I read about recently. It's a true story about two individuals with very different views who found themselves serving together on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. One individual is a well-known Christian conservative from Louisiana who speaks out regularly against gay marriage and abortion. The other individual is a former civil rights lawyer, a Hindu from Chicago, who fights for desegregation and transgender protections. Working together to protect religious minorities abroad, they had an opportunity to get to know one another and discover common ground. But more than that, they also came to respect one another and developed a friendship. So here's the thing that really caught my attention, though. Both of them say that they have not changed their core beliefs, but they have changed the way they express those beliefs. The Christian conservative told his friend that when he is addressing issues over which they disagree, he thinks of her listening to him, and he wants to state his views in a way that would not be offensive to her because of the respect and friendship that they developed. That is the place I hope that we can all get to. And with our speaker's help, I am wildly optimistic that we can do it if we try. Thank you all for joining us. And I hope you really enjoyed this program. I know you will. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Melvin Beavers, our Chancellor's Fellow for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who will deliver our land acknowledgement statement and introduce our speaker this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Drill, for those very kind words, very informative words. And I hope that we all take to heart the story that you told and we're able to really grow and learn from this whole experience. So as the Chancellor stated, we are thrilled to have Monica Guzman on our campus. I want to take this opportunity as well to really thank the members of the Racial Barriers Committee. This group was the campus group that put together the campus read. They were really dedicated to making sure we had all those sessions. And so I want to send a really special thank you to them. I also want to thank the folks that came on and helped me today. It takes a village, and I really do feel like we have that sense of community here. So I want to just thank those folks that were able to chip in and help today. So thank you. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment and read our university land acknowledgements. The University of Arkansas at Little Rock exists on the ancestral homelands of indigenous nations, tribes, and communities, including the Caddo and Quapaw nations. Our campus, like other public institutions, continues to benefit from the theft of land, culture, connection, and resources. On this land, representatives from the Choctaw Nation and Chickasaw Nation dedicated a park to acknowledge and remember the indigenous peoples whom settlers forcibly removed from their homelands. The park is simple. There are trees, a creek, grasses, and wildflowers. At its center, there is a circular path. Walking the circle, we reflect on the connection between past, present, and future, between beginnings, endings, and beginning again. So we must make efforts to truly understand the historical and current experiences of Native peoples. It's about connection to the land and the affirmation and direct support of indigenous people and indigenous futures. This support will help inform the work we do as we build bridges, right, across campus and community, and look forward to creating brighter futures. All right, again, welcome and thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us. Now for the reason that we're all here. Monica Guzman is a bridge builder, journalist, and author who lives for great conversations sparked by curious questions. Her new book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times, was featured on the Glenn Beck podcast and named a New York Times recommended read. She's a senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working to depolarize America. Founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity, an organization working to build a more curious world, host of a live interview series at Crosscuts, and co-founder of the award-winning Seattle newsletter, The Evergreen. Right. She was a 2019 fellow at the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, where she studied social and political division, and a 2016 fellow at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University, where she researched how journalists can rethink their roles to better meet the needs of a participatory public. She was named one of the 50 most influential women in Seattle, served twice as a juror for the Pulitzer Prizes, and plays a barbarian named Shadrock in her Besties Dungeons and Dragons campaign. As a Mexican immigrant, Latina, and dual US Mexican citizen, she lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids, and is the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents, which you all know because you read the book. Christine Jones, the former chair of Racial Barriers Committee and web editor for Records and Registration, will moderate our discussion. And so without further ado, please give a warm and resounding welcome to Monica Guzman.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. This is my first time in Arkansas. It's awesome. I'm catching myself saying y'all a lot more. I advocate for y'all anyway, but being in the South, it's like, yeah, I'm home. Like, y'all is home. Let's do this. So first off, thank you to the Chancellor, to Dr. Beavers, to everyone here, everyone I've met today, and everyone who helped make this visit possible. So the reason that I wrote this book, really begins with, I think, this summation of the problem. We are so divided or blinded. We are so polarized or paralyzed. We have so much creative potential that is stymied, that feels stuck. And beyond that, it feels like it's not just a blindedness, right? Not just a blindness to who people really are, what their perspectives are really about, even the actual fractures that make up our debates. Mostly we have projections of what those debates are and act on that. It's not just a blindedness, it's also a brokenness of our relationships, but brokenness too of the systems and processes that we feel in a healthy democratic republic ought to help us learn how to thrive together, both in local communities and nationally. Something feels fundamentally broken. And then there's also a sense of betrayal, almost like, shouldn't we do better? Aren't we capable of that? Don't we have the smarts? Don't we have the connections? Don't we have the technologies? Shouldn't this be a time of incredible collaboration, lots of surprises, and tons of curiosity? So that's how I'd sum it up. There's a blindness, there's brokenness, and there's a sense of betrayal of our neighbors, betrayal of our fellow citizens. We should be able to do something. And I think the answer is curiosity. In my career as a journalist, few things are more powerful. Few things can cross the barriers between us better than a really perceptive question, a powerful and perceptive question. Has anyone seen Ted Lasso? fun quote in there, be curious, not judgmental. And it turns out you actually cannot be both at the same time. These are two different modes. When you are curious, you are open. You are eager to learn, or you're at least receptive. When you are judgmental, you are looking at something through the certainty of a lens that you've put on, maybe through your experience. Sure, some judgments are responsible, some judgments are necessary. But in a dangerously divided time, what we end up doing a lot is judging each other more while engaging each other less. It's a vicious cycle because we are drawing further apart, so far apart that what we think about each other doesn't resemble reality more and more and more. And people also say, well, wait, curiosity, what are we just supposed to be curious about each other till the cows come home? Like that's all we do? But no, we're not seeking to understand. We're not opening our minds just so that that's the end. We're doing it so that persuasion itself can be effective again. Right now, the process of persuasion in this broken time is something more like the process of insisting reasons to each other and repeating them, except more loudly, and just responding to what feels like an imposition with another imposition. Persuasion itself is not effective, and it won't be until we find a better way. So there's three paths I took to this book. One is as a journalist. I've taken very seriously what I consider a personal mission to help people understand each other. That is possible, that there's a way to do that. And also as a community builder, I've seen communities lead themselves. I've seen people be able to tackle tough topics in ways that surprise even them. But also, the real reason I wrote this book, I think at the end of the day, is my parents. So I am a liberal who voted for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in the last couple of elections, and my parents voted both times very enthusiastically for Donald Trump. And we're Mexican immigrants. I live in Seattle, true blue democratic country, and I could stop conversation anywhere I went by saying, my parents are Mexican immigrants who voted for Trump. And then I'd wait and see what would happen next. Would people walk away? Or would somebody ask why? Would somebody get curious? Curiosity is particularly powerful because it is not a personality trait. We often talk about it as if it is, as if it were. Curiosity is a practice. The more you do it, the more you lean into that capacity we all have, the easier it gets to do it the next time and the next time and the next time. It's a craving for knowledge. It's often called the knowledge emotion, and it feels emotive. When you just start, something kind of sparks your interest and you go online and you go down a rabbit hole. We've all been there. It's sometimes like an itch you just need to scratch when you're gathered with friends and somebody goes, that guy from that movie, who's that guy from that movie? What is that guy from that movie? And finally somebody takes out their phone and looks up the guy from that movie. You just have to know. It has this power. And what we know from the science and the research is curiosity is activated when our attention is on the gap between what we know and what we want to know. But there's two things that can take that capacity, that opportunity away really quick. One of them is fear. You cannot wonder about something you think is out to get you. If a bear is chasing you, you're not going to think about how fuzzy it is or anything like that. You're going to get the heck out of the way. But the true archvillain of curiosity is certainty. If you think you know, you won't think to ask. And in times of deep turbulence and what feel like high stakes debates, in times of deep identification and attachment to our beliefs, it's easy to be certain about a lot of things. So this turns to where curiosity starts. Curiosity starts when you turn assumptions, which is certainty by another name, when you turn your assumptions into questions, when you recognize that you are making assumptions about someone, about a group of people, about the individual in front of you, and you catch yourself in the act and you say, wait a minute, is that true? Do they believe that because of this? One of the most pernicious assumptions in our politics is, if you oppose what I support, you must hate what I love. Which is a way of saying, you oppose me, I can't stand for that. What could I possibly have to learn from you? Other pernicious assumptions are about the people themselves. You must be crazy, stupid, or evil. Those three, when you think of those in conversation, think away from them as fast as you can. That certainty about the other person's character will keep you from being open to their life, their experience, their perspective. So I'm going to close these, and these are just opening remarks, because really, this is about the conversation, right, Christine?
That's right.
Just going to close with a couple of powerful questions that can help people cross divides with each other. One is to ask how, not why. So we're often tempted, when we want to be curious, to say why. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? But in times of tension, when we're divided, when we're sorting ourselves into like-minded groups and all these things, asking why can feel like you're putting somebody on the stand. You're asking them not just to justify an idea, but to justify themselves, or at least it might feel that way to that person, right? Because it's not, person A and person B, it's the liberal and the conservative. And everything that's downloaded into our minds when we think of those categories, depending on our relationship to them. So when you ask, how did you come to believe what you believe? You're inviting that person to become a storyteller. You're inviting that person to share their expertise on the one thing that no one knows better than them, which is their own experience. You're inviting that person to give you a tour of their perspective, rather than putting them on trial. Another very important question, very powerful, curious question, is what are your concerns? You're talking about abortion. What concerns you about where we are with laws around abortion in this country? What concerns you about guns in schools? What concerns you about liberty as a value in America today? And then the follow-up question is, what else? What else concerns you? What we tend to do is, when we're first asked questions like this, we will share what we think is safest to share. And what's that? Whatever we see other people take shelter under. The reasons that are shared everywhere, the memes, right? Everything that's coursing through social media. But keep asking, and you will get to some genuine concerns, some vulnerable spots, if you're able to build that trust that could really illuminate the other person for you. And then maybe the most important question is a question you ask yourself, especially when you are tempted by making a judgment of the other person that leads you to a certainty that there's nothing more you have to learn. And that question is, what am I missing? What am I missing? That question is probably the most important question to ask in dangerously divided times. You will be tempted to think you're missing nothing. And that question has an assumption embedded in it. And the assumption is that, yes, you are missing something. There's something in this other person's concerns. There is something in how they arrived at their perspective that you don't have to agree with, but could make more sense and could illuminate the path to better understanding, and hopefully to something that is better than the brokenness and the blindness. It could help us see and build a world that sees itself. And there is so much more to talk about, but I want Christine to be asking those questions. So let's do this. Let's go.
Thank you. I guess the first thing that I wanted to say was, as chair of the Racial Barriers Committee, I was in charge of, getting everything laid out and the scheduling. And of course, we started reading the book before we started to hold the meetings, but the one thing that came up was why. As the Racial Barriers Committee, we advocate for equity across the board for all students. So of course, our stance is we're ready to jump in and fight. So I guess the first question that I had for you was, why should we read this book and follow this roadmap that you've laid out for us as a group that
wants to fight.
wants to fight, right?
Yeah. And the short answer is it makes you a stronger fighter. The most effective activist and advocate is a curious one. So we have it, you know, we do have this image of you want to make a change and so you fight. What does fight look like? Well, it looks like strength. What does strength looks like? Well, it looks like confidence. What does confidence look like? Well, it looks like certainty. What does certainty do? Makes it hard to communicate with people who disagree. What does that do? Makes it hard for persuasion to be effective beyond coercion. What does that do? It makes it hard for ideas to cross barriers between people who already agree. And so when I look around, I see a fragmented society that is losing its ability to speak to each other the good ideas and the experiences that ought to be shared and understood across so many barriers. So I'll give you one story by a man named Jonathan Rauch. He was a same-sex marriage advocate. And so he talks about how, you know, in the 90s when he was doing this work, the last thing he and other allies wanted to do was talk to people who not only disagreed that same-sex marriage should exist, but might have really, really strong judgments even about the value of being gay at all, right? So to be in the presence of that is pretty tough when it's a part of your identity. And what he said was that even though it was hard and painful at times, many of them saw the value in it and did it anyway. And so they would have curious, open, long conversations, you know, seeing the humanity of people who were just uncomfortable with this stuff and talking to them and hearing them out. And he said that one of the things that they learned was that a lot of these folks had relatives, people they loved who were gay. And they realized that there was a powerful question. And the question was, don't you want someone you love to have the experience of being with someone they love in the deepest possible way? And so he talks about how first it was one light that went off, then another, and then it was a room full of light. And so he watched as that was one of the things that early on began to cascade into more rights for LGBTQ community. So that's one example. And I'll say one more thing, which is there's a balance here, right? If you are a fighter and you are uncompromising, good. I know that sounds like I'm contradicting myself. Here's the thing. I see it as sort of like, imagine, you know, that a cause is sort of like a volcanic island, like the island of Hawaii, I don't know, like a volcanic island with a big mountain in the middle and the coastlines, right? This is a community of thought that wants to change the world. At the top of that mountain is the uncompromising fighter holding up the sign, right? Shouting the loudest, trying to get heard, trying to say enough. Good. But for change to be real, beyond coercion, they need to be supported by the coastlines. On the coastlines of that island, you need to have people who are curious. You need to have people stretching out a hand. And maybe they hold identities or certain ideas that make this easier for them. But they're stretching out a hand and saying, come check us out, people who don't quite agree. Come check us out. Let's have a conversation. So it's about balance. But I still come back to, I do think that the most effective advocate is the one that can do both, is the one that knows when to fight and knows when you have to work on the underlying bonds of trust across ideas to make sure that the fight can work.
Thank you. That was a great answer. In one of our previous conversations, you said that we need to be okay with friction. And I just was curious as to why you feel that way.
Yeah, so when I talk about friction, it's in the context of what I refer to as the SOS. The SOS is the call for help. It's a framework for thinking about how we got to be so divided. It stands for sorting, othering, and siloing. So we sort ourselves into like-minded groups. We put distance between ourselves and those we deem different. And then we silo. We end up hearing stories and voices who tend to agree with us. So even if we're exposed to different perspectives, it tends to be through screens and layers of judgments before they arrive at us. Friction, I'll quote the philosopher Michel de Montaigne said that we've got to rub and polish our brains against the other. There's also a quote from the Bible, I think it's in Proverbs, that as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. That there's something that we learn, there's something we become that's greater than ourselves when we allow some conflict, some tension, some friction to sharpen us, and that friction coming from other people. So I'll give you an example of where I think this is particularly useful now. Because of our silos, and we tend to be around like-minded people so often, one of the downsides of that is when you share your instincts, you'll share your blind spots. You'll share your blind spots too. And so how can you possibly check yourself on that? It's very hard to do if you don't have some contrast. There's a school up in Connecticut that started a course based on my book called Intro to Inquiry. And I went and visited them just 5 weeks in. And they had already done this incredible exercise. They looked at news coverage about Republican governors sending folks to Martha's Vineyard. Do you all remember this? Mm-hmm. And the controversy around that in immigration? And they looked at that coverage from mainstream left-leaning sources and from more right-leaning media. And they found a really interesting contrast. And the contrast was right-leaning media, the name for the people was illegal immigrant. Left-leaning mainstream media, the name was migrant. If they had stayed in their silos, they would have only seen migrant, right? And so what they saw was that those labels, the contrast in those labels represents a contrast in how both sides tend to stack certain values. Migrant does not contain anything about legality or, authority or whether someone might break the law. But illegal immigrant does. There's a concern for legality that's there. And as an immigrant, I can recognize the contrast that because these students were able to see that there are two names, they were able to understand that there are different values and different sorts of frameworks that people come and apply to this issue. They now see it as more complex than they would have had they only seen the one thing with the one name. Not to mention, they now have linguistic fluency across the divide. And so a term may not immediately slap them across the face, and they might say, oh, I understand that this is how this issue tends to be kept off for folks. And maybe there's a reason why, and I can get curious as to why they use that term, and I prefer this term, and we should have a conversation about what term is best.
So I did a lot of research when we first started reading the book. I found some articles online, and one of the articles that I found was published in the New York Times soon after I never thought of it that way was published. It was released on March 7th, and it was written by Lisa Celine Davis. I don't know if you've seen this, but the article basically asserts that your book wants us to empathize with our enemies. Do you disagree with that assessment?
I have questions about how she would define enemy. But I think it's a fair starting point. Empathize with the enemy. I'll tell an anecdote that might share where I'm hesitating. There's a man by the name of John Powell. He runs the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. He's extraordinary and a wonderful bridge builder. And he tells this story about, he's talking about bridge building as a concept. And he's talking with a friend who's a pastor. And the pastor's just having some real trouble. And he goes, John, are you asking me to bridge with the devil? And John goes, maybe don't start there. And so John talks about the difference between long bridges and short bridges. Long bridges is, I'm going to talk to a Nazi tomorrow. Okay, well, that's going to be, extra tough.
Right.
Not impossible. We can talk about that, but extra tough. Short bridges are, here's somebody I know, here's somebody who there's some common ground with, but we differ in this one issue. That's a short bridge. I think we all have access to short bridges. And so John says, go build your short bridges. And after a while of building short bridges, you may ask, who were you calling the devil? So that's why it's the term enemy. I want to put a circle around that and zoom into that and go, who are you calling the enemy? How does that structure your thinking about them? How might that make you certain in ways that prevent the kind of calibration that could allow good ideas and your own experience, if that's what they're missing, what's preventing that communication?
Right. And the article of that author, the author of the article asks the question, would these same techniques work on a larger scale in a country where 62% of Americans feel unsafe expressing their political opinions when the right and left are so extreme that more people declare political homelessness each day?
That's right. No, it's bad. The stats are bad. and there's plenty of really good critiques about, wait a minute, you're advocating for us changing one-on-one conversations in our own lives. What's that going to add up to? That doesn't feel like it's enough to move anything, like move the needle on anything. And while it's true that we do need structural changes, we need institutional changes, I'm very familiar from the inside with the media. Does the media contribute to polarization? Heck yes, it does. Does it need to be part of the solution? Yes. Do they know how to do it? Absolutely not. It's really, really stuck. It's tough. Same with politics. I work a lot with politicians via Braver Angels and our initiative Braver Politics, which is fantastic. But even then, some people in really high positions of power that you would think would be the people well placed to change this institution still feel helpless. So what then? And so I take a step back and I think of it this way. As a journalist, I think of journalism being the truth-building institution of society, right? When things are healthy, hopefully that's contributing at least. But then I ask myself, what is our trust-building institution? And I come up empty. We don't have one. But in another way, we do. I believe that our trust-building institution is and has always been our own organic relationships across difference. But they are drying up. We are burning bridges with each other, one by one by one by one. The well of trust on which we need to build everything, including truth, is drying up. So my answer basically to her critique is, yeah, this is the only way. I think it's a fantasy to think that media and politics, which are mirror institutions, can change by themselves without us being the models and giving the cues. I think it has to be simultaneous, but it does start small because it's in the small scale, one-on-one conversations where real relationships can be built. Not on Twitter, not in those ways, but when our full humanity is present and showing up.
We know you've spoken with many people all along the political spectrum who you may not have agreed with. And for myself, all bets are off when it comes to disagreements regarding equity. Is there a line for you? Do you have a line that people aren't allowed to cross, or?
Yeah, I think I hear this question a lot. And in this question, I hear a lot of concerns about, knowing when to fight, knowing when to take your vulnerable self out of a threatening situation. Lots and lots of questions. And so this might be disappointing, but I don't think that there is one prescription for all people. I do think everyone makes their own decision. And so you asked me about my personal red line, which I'll get to. the best that I can come up with for guidelines to know when you need to remove yourself, when you need to say, I'm done, right? In a conversation is an analogy to the kitchen. Heat in a conversation is good. Heat is good. The question is whether it's cooking something or burning something. You will know. You will know in the conversation. This friction, this heat, it's making something new. I'm thinking, I never thought of it that way. They're thinking, I never thought of it that way. I'm uncomfortable, but I'm learning. You know, this kind of sucks, and maybe it's even painful, and maybe it's painful for unjust reasons, but I'm learning. Or something's burning. Trust is burning. This relationship is burning. This is not right. My sense of dignity is burning because of what this person is saying and how it's landing. Those are all, you know, who am I to say? Each of us has our own relationships, our own attachments to our own beliefs. So I tend to reject the idea that there ought to be socially reinforced red lines. If you are Black, you should not talk to this person. If you are queer, you should not talk to that person. And one of the big reasons that I reject that is because we know from examples that some people have done that to enormous effect. One of the most famous examples is Daryl Davis, a Black blues musician, through his conversations with card-carrying white supremacists. He has derobed more than 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan. So if there were to be a socially reinforced red line, there would not have been a Daryl Davis and we'd have 200 more members of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't want that. This is hard to do. We can't expect everyone to be Daryl Davis, but I don't think we should expect people not to engage. I think there's a danger. So my red line, honestly, is I don't have.
Okay.
But I don't expect that. I have one in a conversation. If my dignity's burned, I'm out. But it doesn't happen that often.
Right. And actually what we're going to do now, those are all my questions. We're going to take questions from the audience and our Zoom.
Yes.
It's coming from over here.
All right, so we have a couple questions here from our Zoom audience. And I'm going to venture to say that our first question was about people that are hurtful and harmful. And I think you just answered that really well. So hopefully that participant feels that that's answered. The second question is a kind of about policies that you just spoke about. And so the question, I'll read it here kind of verbatim. So while it's great that we learn to respect each other's perspectives, when it comes down to policies and laws, we do have to choose sides. How do those ideas translate to policy making?
I mentioned Braver Politics. So that's an initiative that's part of Braver Angels, the nonprofit that I work very closely with, where we are doing workshops for sitting members of the US Congress. We just finished a series of workshops for the New Hampshire State Legislature. We've done, gosh, all kinds of things. During the midterms in Washington State, we piloted new candidate debates. So different sets of ground rules for campaign debates that the results were awesome, really staggering, really cool. I think that the most powerful way this applies to policy is how our policymakers behave with each other. I did not watch the State of the Union. I heard some things about it. And there's a way to sort of ask, who are they serving? Who are elected officials serving, right? And of course, in theory, they're serving us. They're serving the American people. But even they will tell me, you know, off the record, right? It feels like I'm serving the, you know, wanting to get booked on TV that night to yell on behalf of my base. It feels like I'm serving a sort of binary where we have to just be at the polls and fight because that's the only way we get attention, the only way we get reelected or what have you. So it feels like they're serving this dysfunctional system that keeps them behaving in ways they're not proud of. So that's the answer to me is, it's how policymakers behave. It's what we need is sort of a renewal of a certain temperament. It's not let's agree. It's not even necessarily let's compromise. Sometimes that's not the right way to think about it. It's let's actually understand before we start yelling. Let's actually sit down and be like, you see this differently, and I really want to be generous about that. Maybe you all know the difference between straw manning and strong manning, right? Straw manning being, I'm not actually arguing with your point. I'm going to make a little straw man out of your point that isn't really your point and punch it. And that's what we do to the cameras all the time. And that's not helping us. But to strong man, you have to actually understand generously why the other side believes what they believe. So that's the reform we need.
Great. We'd like to see if there's anyone in the audience here who has questions. We have a live microphone we can bring to you.
Why was there anybody that wanted to come up?
Don't be shy.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll read some of the questions that were submitted online. One question was, how heated were some of the conversations that you've had about political views before you wrote the book?
Well, they're still pretty heated after. I don't know if there's been much of a difference. And in fact, I'll tell you a funny exaggeration that my husband made the other day, because he said, you know, I've seen your talks, Monica, and I've heard your conversations with your parents, and you don't follow your own advice. And I laughed really hard. He was exaggerating. I mean, my mom and I and my dad, there are certain tactics we follow that I think are really important. For example, my mom always credits this, but when she and I talk, we always acknowledge each other's good points. I mean, one of the things we say the most to each other is, that's a good point. That's fair, you know, in Spanish. Oh, claro, sí cierto. Yeah, okay, I see that, right? And I think of it as almost like building base camps up a mountain where it's a really, really tall mountain and the air is really thin. You build a base camp because you need to acclimate. You need to sit there and stay with it. So there's little check-ins, you know, you're trying to climb a tall mountain together to see each other's views in harder and harder ways. But if you can say, I see that, I see what you mean. I don't agree with it. I may not even like it, but I get it. I see it. Then the person goes, oh, I'm being heard and understood. Cool. Let me say something even riskier, right? But the reason that me and my parents, I think, can get to this place where we can even hurl insults at each other sometimes is that there's deep, 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 deep trust. And you know, we see that in friendships. Well, like if you have friends who like banter and tease each other, you know, why doesn't it scar? Well, because there's just a lot of trust, but that's not ultimately what's being made vulnerable. But that can take a lot of time and a lot of practice and a lot of demonstration. In most of our relationships, it takes a lot of demonstration of the right intentions before you can get there.
I'm going to follow that one up with another question real quick, just because it correlates. But it's, as your children grow older, how are they navigating their understanding of how you and your parents come to terms? And then have you and your parents either had or plan to have those hard conversations, like about race and differences with your children?
Oh, do you think the question is whether me and my parents are going to have conversations all together with my children? Do you think that's what the question is?
It doesn't specify, if, I mean, all together, I would say, yeah, to sit them down all as a group and maybe talk to them.
Oh, interesting. Well, can you read the first part again? So I can
Sure.
speak to my children more easily.
No problem. As your children grow older, how are they navigating their understanding of how you and your parents have come to terms?
Yeah. Well, they've been witness to more than one heated exchange over the dinner table for sure. So they've seen some of that. They've heard even from another room. I wrote in the book about one particular conversation. I was supposed to make dinner, but I was so into it with my dad about Trump. So it's October 2020. So into it that my husband just like took one look at us and said, she's not doing dinner at all, and went and made dinner and did it for the kids. But they could hear us. They could hear us go to town. I think when I talk to my kids about this, it's really interesting. And I guess we have to remember it's Seattle. There's a certain context. And the context is very left-leaning, right? So my kids have come home and said, you know, I heard Donald Trump is a blah, blah, blah. And I kind of don't let that stand. I'll say, whenever I can, I'll try to sort of remind, well, you know that Tito and Tita voted for Trump, right? We know folks who voted for Trump. You know, are they blah, blah, blahs? Do you think that that's why they voted for him? Because they want to support someone who's, like, there's probably more going on there. And so they know that. They actually know, my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old, that there exists this tension, but I'm trying to present it as something that is open. And yeah, it's never sort of a Tito and Tita are just bleh. They don't believe this and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't allow those judgments to stand. Hopefully that helps.
So as speaking from experience, like the Trump era created like a lot of division in my family. And admittedly, I was somebody who like very brashly was like an initiator of heated exchanges in my family. Do you have any suggestions for people who may have not so inadvertently burned bridges with people?
Speaking from experience,
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a kind of repair work. You might be surprised, depending on how you approach it. It may not be that hard to get started. What I found really works, and we see at Braver Angels as well, is a lot of humility at the beginning. And I go back to what I was saying about, you know, when there's distrust, and sort of a fear that you're going to get attacked or made fun of or mocked or condescended to, you need to make sure your actions back up your intentions. And that's going to take a long time for people. The principle here is that people cannot hear unless they're heard. And so that's the barrier, really. And if you've burned bridges, or if you are the person for whom to your family, like you're the one with the snarky comment, you're the one that makes them feel condescended to, it's going to take some time. But even so, you really still can begin with the intention. You can find the right moment, and you can try to say at the beginning with some humility and maybe even apology if you feel it's warranted. I know in the past I've been a difficult person to talk to about these things. But I want you to know that I know that it matters to you. And I want to tell you that I want to try to understand better. And then you can list off, here's a couple things I'm going to not do, right? I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try to let you speak for a couple minutes before jumping in with my opinion. I'm going to let that, what do you think? Given that, can we talk about some of these things sometime, over coffee? Like, you let me know what's good for you. And that's tough. It's tough to get to that conversation, but it's absolutely possible depending on the relationship.
So there's another question on Zoom. We'll kind of take turns here if that's all right. There's actually one statement that I think I'll just share, and then there's a question. So the statement is: the hardest situation is when people you love are willing to do serious harm to the relationship rather than being willing to be vulnerable and talk and listen with each other. And I think that plays into a lot of what has been said today in very true words.
Very true.
I don't know if there's anything you want to comment on that or move to a question.
I mean, what I'll say on that is, there's an author named Valerie Kaur. She wrote a book called See No Stranger that I highly recommend. And she talks about anger and how anger is a force that protects that which we love. And I think oftentimes when we would rather burn and we would rather rage than get vulnerable, it's because it just feels like something's getting too, you want to protect something. Maybe it's sort of a sense of status in your family. Maybe it's, I don't know. We see this often with generations, parents and their children. It's like, I don't want my child making me feel like a child. You can't do that to me, right? But then children don't want their parents to make them feel like children either. So that can be tough. But yeah, there's always a way to get curious. And I think what helps is getting curious about what they're trying to protect. And I'll give one tip: if you face anger from someone else in a conversation, but you think that there still might be a way to cook something and not burn something, If this is a genuine reaction, it's a really good thing to say, which is, I didn't know that mattered that much to you. Can you tell me more?
Hi, thank you for being here. So you mentioned like short bridges are a good place to start. And I think that's in part an answer to my question, but I was just thinking, so much of this stuff is kind of scary for me to hear because, it brings to my attention how I am afraid of talking to people, who might be different than me and might be disagree with me or hurt my feelings or impact something that I hold dear or something. And so I was just going to ask, what is, a good way do you think to get started with having some conversations with people in your life, or even eventually maybe leading up to people that you don't know that well, to open your mind and,
Yeah. Well, here's the beautiful thing about the human brain, the human mind. It can do this lovely thing where it represents things. So the reason that matters, I find it fun when I am in a like-minded group of people and politics comes up and we're all just agreeing with each other, but in a snide way toward the absent other side of the debate. I find it fun to represent what I know of the other side of the debate generously. So even though we don't have someone representing that point of view, well, I'm gonna be that representative because I think it's gonna make a conversation more interesting, more complex, and more true. And so what's fun is you can represent ideas to yourself. So if you feel that you're not ready to have these conversations really with any real person, that's okay. Have it with yourself next time you read a perspective online that represents the perspective that's scaring you. Hopefully it's a widely held perspective, right? Not something so deviant, not like, oh, here's, I don't know, people who think you can jump off your roof and fly. Like, no. But something that is widely held. Find an opinion, maybe something that you come across on social media that you'd normally like, or like, I don't know, leave a snide comment without reading. Open the article, read it, and ask yourself 2 questions as you read it. Ask yourself, what deep down concern is this writer trying to express? What deep down human concern is this writer trying to express? And the second question is, what might be the strongest argument for this side? You just have that conversation with yourself. There's no risk of someone hurting you. And so that is the shortest bridge of all. You're just practicing curiosity with yourself. You'll be surprised how you can use that crowbar on your own without even opening your mouth.
thank you.
Hey, so I wanted to basically read your book to you really quick.
Okay.
In your book, you said, if you're serious about staying curious, when you talk to people who think differently than you, it's always better not to try to win. So this afternoon in the workshop, you gave us some really good actionable ways to kind of begin to have those conversations. However, everybody that was in the room was there and ready to be curious.
Okay.
Very welcome and open to having conversations like that.
Yep.
So specifically, I know I've got just like probably many people in here, family members that don't necessarily hold the same values that I do. So when you're kind of meeting that brick wall and you're the one that's open to having that conversation and seeing their side, their perspective, but they're not willing to reciprocate, how do you approach that?
Yeah. So an image comes to mind. I'll paint the picture and then explain why it came to mind. This may seem funny. When I was growing up, me and my mom had a pretty, I don't know, more or less like close relationship the whole time. It was tougher with her and my brother. And my brother would just be like, how was school? Fine, And she figured something out. My brother had a TV in his room and really prided himself in knowing all things pop culture. Like he inhaled VH1 behind the music and pop-up video and all that stuff. Like he always knew the trivia about all the game and movies. And my mom figured out that if she just came into his room and sat and watched TV with him, half an hour, 1 hour, an hour and a half. You know, all of a sudden he'd be like, oh, so today at school. And I'll be like, oh yeah, really interesting. Yeah. It's the same principle. Going back to that idea of people can hear only when they're heard. Sometimes it feels counterintuitive, but curiosity is contagious. And if you are there, you know, and they love MSNBC, they watch Fox News all the time. Okay, you sit with them and you watch, and you make comments of understanding, of trying to understand. You notice that they laughed at something, and you go, oh yeah, like what? We'll talk about that. That's interesting. Or you just kind of sit there in that experience, and that person will just be like, what is she doing here? But if you demonstrate a real interest in what they care about, then they'll reciprocate over time, sometimes a long time, and it's not guaranteed. But they may reciprocate in being curious about what you care about. We are mimetic creatures, so we really are. And so there's a lot of research that shows, for example, using hedging language, right? What instead of talking with a lot of confidence and certainty, you say, you know, for right now, when I think about abortion, here's where I come down. Instead of the only right way to think about abortion is this, right? When you use hedging language, research shows it spreads. The other people in your conversation, when it's their turn to speak, they too will kind of communicate their position with some flexibility. Interesting. And then all of a sudden you have changed the structure of thought that guides your conversation. Same principle. So anyway, there's a couple of approaches. This is imperfect science and nothing is guaranteed.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
My question really is for your parents, but I don't think they're in the audience, are they?
not. Yeah.
So you're the parent in the room.
Mhm.
How are you going to navigate things when one of your children, they're both pre-teenagers, when one of your children in 10 years after teenage years decides to move to Arkansas and vote for Sarah Huckabee Sanders for president? And I learned a little bit about what your mom did just in your answer, or we did, and we learned that. Do you have other ideas?
Well, let me clarify. What do I do about it? In what way? Like, what is it that's going to happen that I need to address? I just want to.
So right now,
Yeah.
you said that you're a proud liberal of
Proud liberal daughter, conservative parents. Always.
conservative parents, and I
Overreaction.
bet you're not alone in this audience. I know you're not alone. And so one of your children may end up going to a different direction. And maybe very vociferous about that, in the same way that you probably have
I
been
actually suspect
vociferous.
both of them are, yes.
Well, tell us how emotionally you feel about that, how you deal with that.
I don't know. I think I think that's, I'm sensing a reaction of like, but let me examine that for a minute.
Again, the real
It's
question,
interesting that I think it's fine.
the real question is for your parents,
Right. Oh, yeah. People have asked them that a lot.
but you're not your parents, so I
No,
can't
but
ask
but
them.
they've come to several of these events and they've watched a lot of live stream. I'm sure they'll watch this. Yeah, I think they're proud conservative parents of a liberal daughter and son. I think they would definitely say that. I don't know. What more can I say about that?
You have 10 years to figure it out.
No, it's like, you know, it's interesting. It makes me think one of the interesting experiences with my parents, and I didn't name this in the book, is that we both basically voted at almost the same time. We both started voting at almost the same time because they became citizens in the year 2000. And because I was 17, I was automatically naturalized at the same year. So I guess I believe that they were able to vote in 2000, but I voted in 2004. I voted in 2002, right? It was almost the same time. And to us, the United States is our adopted country. We chose this country. So it was kind of fun to begin to explore what it means to be a voting citizen together with them. It was really heated, but I think we just always respected that we had the right to vote however we chose at the end of the day. So I hope that that I extend that same acceptance to my children, however they choose to vote. If I believe that they are doing something that is bad, I would like to find a way to communicate that to them. But I have to be very sensitive of the fact that I'm their mother and that they're used to hearing me tell them to do a lot of things. And I need to respect their independence. So I would do that gently. And I would do it only after a lot of time sitting with their reasons for the decision and reminding myself that my children are not crazy, stupid, or evil. I will not accept those things.
Or the end.
Or the enemy, imagine. Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Another question from our online audience that I imagine you get quite frequently, and you even had this morning over breakfast. How do you have these conversations with someone who rejects science and data and bases their arguments on opinions, not based on facts? And you even sometimes use the word lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's tough. So I'll say some of what you and I talked about this morning. Man, that word lies is so interesting. Now, when we start to believe that people believe lies, here's how I think of it. Nobody believes a lie. Nobody believes a lie. To them, it's the truth. So that's important to say. I think that when it comes to disagreement about facts, or rather anything that we feel is just irrefutable, we get stuck. We don't know where to go to from there. What happens next is often rage, shouting, insistence. You know, how could you, especially if you have a relationship, how could my own mother think, blah, right? It's the expectations in our family relationships that make us so tough. The expectations we have of each other beyond strangers. But the conversation about what is true is not the only conversation we can be having. That's what I think is sort of the radical reframing here. We get stuck because we think the only thing we can do is argue about what the truth is. And either we fly off, or we, burn a bridge, or we ruin trust, or we ruin our relationship. There's nothing else to do. You just walk away quietly and go, that guy is an idiot. I can't understand, right? So if the conversation about truth is not the only one to be having, what is the one then to have? And I'm borrowing this from my friend Buster Benson, who wrote a book called Why Are We Yelling? And I love this framework he has. The more important conversation to have in dangerously divided times, and the only conversation that builds trust, is the conversation about what is meaningful. The great thing about the conversation about what is meaningful, which is just about what meaning do you bring to issues, is that everyone is eligible to have it. Everyone has a right to their own sentiments about what's going on in the world around them. Every life is equally valid. That's a painful thing sometimes to accept. If you look at another life and say, you are just a walking opinion that opposes mine, that's not what that person amounts to. They have meaning. So what I found in my conversations is, even if someone has reached what I believe from all the evidence I've seen, and I do keep myself open, I will not close that door. From all the evidence I have seen, even if someone believes what I feel are untrue conclusions, there might still be truth in their story. There will still be truth in their concerns. And so that's what we talk about. Tell me, what concerns you about the conversation right now about elections. I see that you're worried about voter fraud. Like, tell me about that. What personal experiences animate this for you? Whatever it happens to be. And that's fine. And I tell you, I have learned things. I have learned things, and I have made admissions such as, you're right. The 2020 election happened during a pandemic. Lots of states went to mail-in voting for the first time. There is reason to scrutinize that. You're right about that. Okay. There's a point there. It's not just I'm in my trench and you're an idiot. No, I see that. That was a tough time for this country. That election was weird. Okay. Yeah. So, and we all learned that lots of states have their own very different ways of doing this. And yeah, maybe we should, let's be careful and make sure that we allow, it's that tension, right? It's like, you've got to allow everyone to vote, make sure that our elections are accessible. And you also have to make sure that they're secure. Cool. I'm with you on that.
Excuse me. Another question you've touched on a little bit here is, what is your advice for walking away from someone who is not curious or interested in civil discourse? And I'm not sure if this question is specifically about the disengagement part of that.
Yeah. So, if you decide that something's being burned, it's time to go. The ways to do that, well, kind of up to you. It could be that, you are a fighter and you need to declare something really strongly to that person about something you believe. I think there are respectful, firm ways to do that. I want you to know that to me, this is everything. And yeah, and whatever you say. And with that, I need to leave right now. As much as you can, I think the main principle is that the most important thing to do with a bridge is to keep it, not to cross it. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves that in the course of this 1 hour conversation with my niece, we better figure it all out, right? I better be satisfied by her answers. It's ridiculous. The most important thing to do in a conversation is ensure you can have the next one, because some of these topics are not going to get solved in a day, So the disengagement hopefully can be something that you could revisit later. And maybe the timing is going to be tough. Who knows? Maybe you can't do it. But don't burn the bridge, because that bridge is what allows you both to have friction. A quick anecdote on that, if I can share this one. So I heard this from a podcaster who interviewed me and brought up that this had happened to him. That he's white, and he was talking with a white friend, and he heard this white friend say something that to him, and I don't know what it was, but to him was unequivocally racist, just flat out. And so this person said, that's it, like left, and then told himself, I'm not gonna be this person's friend anymore. We're done. Like, we've been friends, but that's it. And then he talked with another of his friends who happened to be Black. And he told him the same thing, thinking that his Black friend would completely endorse his never talking to this other guy again. And the Black friend surprised him and said, you turn right back and you make sure that you continue this relationship, because you are my hope. What's better, no chance that a different perspective could be communicated, or some chance that maybe it could? And the relationship is the substrate. You burn that relationship, you burn a lot. You give up on a lot.
And I think along those lines, that idea of building and leaving the bridge open, a lot of times, the siloing that you discuss, it's not just one topic that there's friction on. And so walking away on one topic and burning that bridge may mean there's not other opportunities to engage on those other topics. So I love that idea. And there's, I think that speaks to the last, the most recent comment we have here, which is, at what point are we enabling harmful ideas to continue? That is my biggest fear personally.
At what point are we enabling harmful ideas to continue? What a question. Enabling harmful ideas to continue. So I see in that maybe a belief or an assumption that by engaging with people who hold what might be harmful ideas, we are allowing them to live and breathe and infect others. Right? I see that assumption in there.
Like that fungus you were talking about?
Yeah, we were talking about The Last of Us on HBO. And based on the video game, and the fungus that infects the brain makes us all into zombies. This is a tough one, because I think there's so much to unpack there. And I guess one thing I come down to pretty strongly is, this is a democracy, right? Like, harmful ideas are part of our society. in that some ideas are going to lead to bad things. But we believe, I think, in people's freedom to think. But I believe that that is checked by our courage to engage each other. I think when you have that healthy and operable in a society, I do have faith that the ideas that lead to the healthiest society are going to come to the top. Now, I understand that that feels really shaky. I get that, I do. I still believe it though. Like, I do not want to live in a country where we think about, we need to kill that idea. How do you do that without killing the person's spirit and freedom? I don't know how you do that. So I recognize that's hard to hear. I do, but that's the faith I have in us. You know, I think we all want to be heard, and I think we all want that experience of belonging together. And I think we all want the end of this brokenness and idiocy, because we can't do this. It's not like anybody wants that. You know, I don't think we want a society that constantly checks what ideas to put walls up around. I think we want a society where bad actors can't thrive because we are all curious and engaging and won't allow that.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
I just have one more from the submitted. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
fine.
see.
I didn't want to take anyone else's turn. So you talked a little bit about how politicians, it's like sometimes they're just playing a role, playing to their base. Maybe it's how they think they're going to get reelected. We've also got the challenge of the people that really profit from division. And, you know, I could go back and look at the 80s with, you know, trashy talk shows that, you know, from the first time Geraldo got whacked in the nose with a chair. And then all of a sudden everyone's watching those shows, or the judge shows. These days it's social media with algorithms that push us, or YouTube or so, that just, you know, feed us and push us down rabbit holes. What do you feel, especially when profitability is a factor, what do you feel our chances for really making progress against that are in this country especially?
The chances are very good. And I know that sounds naive. I happen to have the enormous privilege, because of the work that I do, of being in rooms where people who feel that they can't talk about how sick and tired they are of these problems in public are doing it. You know, they're gathering people. Just last week, I was at a roundtable that the Lieutenant Governor of Washington State called with a dozen bridge builders to say, I've had it. I've had it. Give me ideas. I want this office to help. That's the second highest ranking official in Washington State. What will it lead to? You know, we don't know. I also happen to know, because of my connections in journalism, some highly placed folks in that industry are doing incredible things. They know it's a problem. They're trying to fight against these institutional forces and the profits behind them. Absolutely. A friend and amazing author, Amanda Ripley, wrote a book called High Conflict. She talks about one of the solutions being, she calls them conflict entrepreneurs. Marginalize the conflict entrepreneurs. That is something we can all do. I think the chances are good. There's also the Center for Humane Technology, highly influential group, connecting with a lot of power players in Silicon Valley to change social media structurally, because we have seen the cognitive and collaborative devastation that can reign, and nobody intended that, right? But these systems end up kind of doing what they're designed to do, whether we knew we were designing them for that or not. And I'll say one more thing, which is that at a Braver Angels workshop, our facilitator told a story. There was one of our blue participants. So Braver Angels, we use blue for leaning liberal and red for leaning conservative. A blue participant came to a Brave Angels workshop. His policy, he was a landlord. He would not rent to anyone conservative. He thought they were just scum. He will not even rent to a conservative person. And during the workshop, he paired off with someone who was conservative. I mean, not even for that long, right? And he told the facilitator at the end with tears in his eyes that during that exchange, he had looked at his conservative companion and said, I disagree with everything you just said, but powerful people want us to hate each other. Let's not do it. So I think it begins with enough, you know?
Thank you so much for visiting us here at UA Little Rock. I'll tell you, I'm guilty of living in my bubble, right? And I think the pandemic made that easy for a lot of people to do. But as we're starting to come back together, especially on campus, I'm wondering if you have any advice for us on community building, especially since we are in our little blue bubble in a conservative state.
Yeah, how interesting. What a great question. Amanda Ripley has talked about this, and it bears repeating that, you know, the most potent intervention that research keeps pointing us to is something called contact theory. The thing that seems to reduce hate and othering between groups is just contact. That's it. It's that simple. Just hang out. Just hang out. Talk about everything else, you know? Just bear witness to that humanity. There was that question earlier that made me think about, we often approach people, you know, we're afraid their idea, that there's a harmful idea in there and it's going to infect everybody. And so I'm approaching an invalid idea. But the reframe I would do is, you're approaching a valid person. That's what matters. I mean, no matter what idea they hold, everything else about them is bigger, you know? And so it's that contact. There was this very famous Heineken commercial. Sounds crazy. But Heineken made an ad several years ago, went viral. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Really cool ad. And in the ad, they gathered people who were remarkably different. Like, to the extent of someone who is trans and someone who just is not okay with trans people, all right? So that plus like someone who's very pro-life and very pro-choice and all these. And so they filmed this, and people didn't know that they were part of this kind of experiment. And they got them in a room and told them, they didn't know who each other was really and what they believed at all, told them that they had to build something. And so they just pick up like what look almost like IKEA directions and start working together, and you can see them kind of laughing together, and they build what they're supposed to build, and they finally realize it's a bar. Oh, we just built a bar. It's like a little L-shaped bar. And so then they're invited, like they read the instructions, they're invited to sit at the stools and to watch a video. And then you see each person watch a video of the other person they've been with this whole time, opposing their idea, disagreeing with them vehemently. And these were like activists, right? Like, it's not a casual opinion. And then they had a question. Do you want to stay and have a drink with this person, or do you want to leave? And you watch them stay and have a drink with that person. Look it up. It'll bring tears to your eyes. But contact theory, hang out, get to know everything else about each other. And these differences will seem smaller in comparison.
All right, are there any other questions? One more, yes, okay.
I want to touch back down when you mentioned his friend said something racist and he went back to his Black friend and, you know, explained it. As a Black person, I will say there are Black people out here that have this, I hate to use the word, but whitewashed mindset. And what advice would you give to someone who is non-Black, goes to their Black friend and like, hey, you know, someone said this, is this bad? And they say no, but in reality it is. Would you, I don't want them to try to downplay that Black person's feelings, but what advice would you give them? Like, would you tell them, hey, do your own research or listen to, you know?
And this is, if I understand the situation, a non-Black person, no, sum up the situation again.
So,
sorry. Yeah.
so, say a non-Black person goes to a Black person and explains to them, which basically he said something racist, and that man went back to a Black man and explained it, and that Black man said, hey, no, like, that's not racist, but in reality it is.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like playing out into the future. Okay, this person kept the relationship,
Mhm.
goes to this other white friend
Yeah.
and says, hey, like that thing you said, not okay.
Mhm.
And that person goes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Like, what do you do then?
Yeah.
I mean, that's fascinating. I think, well, you're not going to say, okay, yeah, you're right, it's fine. No, it's a deep conviction you have, you know? And so I hope that that person is able to say, I deeply disagree with you, man. I deeply disagree. And I think that attitude of yours is not contributing to a world that I want to live in. You know, I care for you. I do. I hope we can keep talking about this. And I hope if you have questions on this, that you come to me. Yeah. I really do. And I say that with respect.
And the reason why I ask that is because I've heard people say, oh, well, my Black friend said it's okay to say. I don't want anyone, to like make that same mistake because it is highly offensive.
Right, right. No, and it's so personal. It's so personal. You know, and some people, I think there's some relationships where you can just be like, start swearing at the other person and walk out the door to make sure that they know how serious you are and that it won't actually end the relationship. And so you decide that you're willing to go that far to make very clear how serious you are. Thank you.
Okay, we have time maybe for one more question. I think our stop time is 7 and we're just about there. So we'll take one more question from the audience and then okay, 2 more and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, so I'll talk about something that I see us do on social media a lot that I find terribly ineffective, which is the link wars. So tell me if you've seen this on Facebook. It's all in this article. Just read this article. Just read this article. Oh yeah, well read this article. No, you should read this article, get educated. Yeah, you too, you should read this article. You know who's reading the articles? None of them are reading the articles. None of them are reading the articles. So there's that idea of getting educated as something that enriches us, of course, right? But if it appears to come with a trace of condescension, you need to do your homework. It will never penetrate. So that's the thing. It's almost like an order of operations thing. Like to me, the spirit of education is, what can I do to help this person see something that is so important that I believe they're not seeing? And it could be, here's the thing, is like most of the time, a relationship and a conversation is going to be a far more receivable vector than read this article. That's impersonal. That feels like homework, So I think in that scenario, the quote unquote education would hopefully come from that person. And I think one of the most effective ways to do that, remember I was talking about representing. So maybe you are not Black, you're the white person in this, but there's something you can offer, some story, some presentation of something you've learned that you think communicates something this person is missing. And frankly, I do this with my parents a lot when I talk with folks on the left who, in my mind, are communicating some very dehumanizing assumptions about people who voted for Trump. My next move is to tell them about my parents. I had this conversation with my parents and I asked them about this and I assumed that they meant this, but they really meant that. And I learned that about them. So that humanizes them instantly to this person I'm talking to. And I've used the vector of my connection with them in that moment to do that and to do it generously and non-condescendingly. So I think that's it. We have the opportunity to represent others. And that's one of the ways I think we build a better world.
Okay, April.
I get the last question. This
Sure.
is a little scary. We're at a higher education institution. As Jeff mentioned, we are in a blue kind of environment, in a red state. But many of our students, and I would say many of us, may not feel comfortable sharing ideologically different opinions in the classroom or with each other. I would guess there are some conservatives, including myself here, but we don't talk about that because we aren't seen to be okay to have those opinions. So I'm wondering how we encourage folks, this ideological diversity in this larger sea of diversity in a higher education institution, and do it in a way that can be respectful and reasoned and within relationships.
Yeah, as anyone who has been in any minority knows, the more that it feels like the majority dominates the culture, and the more that the way in which it dominates the culture seems invisible to even them, the more courage it takes to stand for your right to having a different worldview, to having a different culture that you are in, and your right to be able to belong, to be able to be here and contribute and be a part of. But again, the more courage it takes and the harder it is. You know, like, and in higher education, like I react to that because this is a place of learning. This is the last place that we ought to allow, and I'm speaking about all universities, for people with ideas that are different to feel that they cannot belong if they are open about those ideas, you know? And I understand the tensions. There's a lot of thought that some of these ideas, you know, would X out or would exclude others. But is that true? Do we know that? Can we at least be curious and open to that? What do we have to learn if we allow more of that to be open? So I just don't think that, I think it's extremely hard for only those in that minority. And to your example, it's, you know, it's the conservative minority that you're speaking to in a university context. I think it's kind of wrong for them to do it on their own. I think that, as we know from so much studies of racial barriers and sexuality barriers, and you have to have those in the dominant culture be willing to see how they are a dominant culture. And that's hard. That takes courage to be willing to see what sorts of things might be dehumanizing others that you may not mean. So I think it has to be a partnership, and it's curiosity all over the place. But if you are the one and you are ready and you want to stand up and say it, then I think there are transparent and wonderful ways to say it that are hard, but you can do it. You know, you can say, there's a conversation in a classroom. It's all been about everyone assumes everyone agrees and everyone's blue. And the red raises a hand and say, I'd like to say something, you know. I want to say first how much I respect this class. And I always feel I learn a lot from all of you. And I want you to know that I disagree with everything that's been said. And I see things very differently. Can I share how it is that I see things differently? Put it back on them, right? If this is a place of learning, I really hope the answer is yes. And then you've got that buy-in, you've got that invitation. Speak.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end things on. And so I would just like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I know the weather has not been great, but you were brave. You were a braver angel. And you came and you listened and you asked great questions. And so I hope that all of you will take some of this, you know, and make baby steps as you apply it in your life. Like, I think that's part of the message here. This isn't going to change overnight, but I think if we use our thinking, practice, massage that muscle, right? It's just like any other thing. It takes time. You have to work at it. And so I just want to thank Monica for coming. I want to thank Chrissy for moderating. Both have done an excellent job. And I would like to ask if we could just give them a round of applause.
All right.
I do believe we have some books still available. So if you don't have a copy of Monica's book, there are signed copies. So you get your first signed copy. And if you have any questions or comments, concerns, or things you want to, let me know about, suggestions for future speakers, please don't hesitate to contact me. If you're not an on-campus person, my email is mebeavers, very easy, mebeavers@ualr.edu. All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming out.